All right, good afternoon, and thank you for joining the Energy Market Update. A special welcome to all of our channel partners able to make it on the call today. That's me on the left, John Vieira. We got our trusty legal disclaimer to the right, and be covering the typical agenda of natural gas fundamentals, market news, weather, and market data. And we have a whole lot of changes to the market data as we start the new year, looking at the balance of 2024 and then full year of calendar year 25 and adding an extra year to those outside years. But before we get to that, starting off with natural gas fundamentals, huge pull coming out right now. So just a couple of weeks ago, there was only a withdrawal of 14 BCF that was taken out of storage. We just had a withdrawal of 326 taken out of storage, which came in above the estimate. So estimates were sitting 318 at 320. So this is bullish on the day, and this is bullish on the story of how do we fare through the end of winter, because we are now in the late half of January to February, which we've been warned about. So just recently, when we look compared to last year and compared to the 5-year average, we were in the high 300s, getting to 400 above BCF. Last week, we're at 350 above last year and 320 above the 5-year average. So we can see we are on that roller coaster ride. And what we're worried about, if these continue to dip and we get hit with some more cold, especially for the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, that could be a recipe for late season price spike. So something to keep an eye on. A couple weeks ago, we thought we were going to skate through totally fine, plenty of surplus. That story has rapidly changed in just a couple of weeks. So we'd actually been sitting above. If we take a look at the blue line and comparing to the light gray, just outside of the light gray, we are back within the min-max range of the past 5 years, which we've been hanging above for the past couple of weeks, making prices feel more comfortable at these lower levels. And for the coming week, we have another big withdrawal plan somewhere between 195 to possibly 215, and that number is going to move around since it's still early in the week. But another big pull coming, cold weather sticking around. Question is, does the cold weather continue through the end of January into February, or do we start getting some spring temperatures sooner than later? Taking a look at a more updated forecast of the production, we do see that production did increase a little bit in the US, and that's kind of showing that green circle between the gold line and that light gray line coming across. But as we see past to the right from the red arrow, it's not really going up too much. So we don't really expect production to gain that much as we move into the future. However, we do expect export capacity to continue to grow. The green circle on the middle chart is then expanded upon and put into the future because the graphics haven't been updated that are published, but the raw data on that chart is basically a continuation of the light gray. The green underline is what's showing on the chart, and then the gold being the years that aren't shown. But you can see that we're ticking back up after having a little bit of a slump into the summer. So exports continue to grow. A lot of projects already being built. There is a story out there of whispers of a media leak that maybe LNG projects are slowed down. This is still in the very early stages and not affecting things just yet. Seems like more of a political move that's coming out right now. And it's going to be also decided on who takes office next. Does it stay blue or go red? Goes red, these things are going ahead anyways. If it goes blue, this just might be for political votes now, and then for the tax money as soon as elected again, might go forward with these projects anyway. So either way, we're expecting, and smart money is expecting, that the LNG exports continuing to go at a rapid rate, possibly doubling in the next several years. So at net, we're going to be less gas for us because it's sending elsewhere in the world for more expensive prices. So that's going to put upward pressure on prices, especially for the outside years, which is a great reason to take advantage when those outside years are lower in comparison. And where is it going? We've gone over this chart many times. The national balancing point for the UK, the title transfer facility uses a virtual trading hub for the EU, and JKM for the Japan-Korean market. Just in case clients are wondering, why is it getting sent abroad? And you can reference these points and bring up prices and show how much more expensive it is than here in the US. So channel partners on the call, again, this chart looks the same, but it's updated. So this is the new January release on risk. And again, this is only for Henry Hub, but we want to use this way of thinking and apply it to our specific regional charts for electric and gas. And we can see that the little blip that used to be before here for the end of 2024, which at one point was up to 10, kind of slunk down to 6, and now it's almost an equal risk, a little bit higher for the up versus downside in the short term. However, we've added on the further outside years, right? The coming winters, 25 and 26, and boy, those have moved up, especially for that outer year. So right now, this would say it's a great time to buy because the chance of it going down versus the amount that it could go up is a lot. The amount going up is a lot greater, so a lot more can lose if you don't lock in at least a part of your load to help average that cost and buy at good times when it's below the 52-week average, when it's close to 52-week lows like some of our markets are. Taking a look at market news, it's been a very busy week for a lot of different stories. This week kind of looking at how are we dealing? This is an evolving story. Last week we talked about bipartisan legislation that was passed by both the House and the Senate. The idea was to get rid of President Biden's waiver around EV charging stations. So to go deeper into that, EV charging statements have requirements of Buy America regarding basically taxpayer money being used here for EV charging stations. The waiver allows for this money, the taxpayer money, to be sent to China, the EV charging stations, and also is pushing back timelines of when things actually need to be built here in America. So it's slowing down when it's coming here. President Biden likely his veto will likely stand since there's not likely enough votes in Congress to override that, which would take 2/3 from both the House and Congress. So it's probably going to stay in place. So we can expect, more charging stations, might be able to get more cars on the road. The DOT, the Department of Transportation, who has $7.5 billion of federal money allocated for the purposes of building out these charging stations to encourage EV uses. December reports were showing somewhere between 0 to a handful of EV charging stations were actually built with that money. This is not talking about Tesla that's going out and building their own superchargers going around. So if this had passed, it would have slowed down EV charging stations, but possibly could have sped it up in the next couple of years because we have more production here. Right now, by vetoing it and allowing the money to go to China, it's basically growing our dependence on them for this clean energy push. Biden stated himself the legislation would slow down his efforts to push his clean agenda, which makes sense. He made the rule and he doesn't want to overturn what he had put forth in the first place. Our real takeaway is more charging stations on the road, we might have more EV cars leading up to demand. Presidential election is going to be very important for this story. Republican takes office, likely that's the end of this. Biden stays in office, this will continue to go forward if he becomes the nominee, which is the most likely. The other issue that's standing out there is that China could overnight decide, hey, we don't want to play ball anymore and not send you any more of these parts, or they decide to raise tariffs, starting to make things uneconomic, which would further complicate things. Building on this story, looking at EVs, and over the past 2 months talking about a whole bunch of these stories of EV problems and changes. This is not to say that EVs are bad or they're going out the window. It's just that it's a huge challenge in front of the US if this is going to be pursued. And more importantly, we're talking about smart money, where money's actually being invested and how major corporations are actually acting. And their actions speak volumes to what they are actually seeing out there for consumer demand versus what might be in the headlines or coming from the current administration. So we talked about Hertz Rental Company cutting about 20,000 vehicles, about a third of its fleet, to reinvest in gas-fired cars. Last week, past couple of weeks, all over the headlines, especially in the Illinois, Chicago area, there was lines of dead EVs everywhere from the cold weather coming in. Whether the battery couldn't charge or if they could charge, the batteries were taking way longer to charge. Ford is the next company, is the most recent company to rethink their approach regarding EVs. And this is a big story in that a lot of the projects that the White House touted as success, several of them have already failed, some such as the buses that they gave money to and were showing off. That we talked about a couple months ago, that failing. Well, the F-150 Lightning, which President Biden's seen driving there, they touted that as a great success. They thought it would catch on. So then, wait to see how consumers react, and the reaction has not been good. CEO of Ford comes out and says, our goal is to align Lightning production to customer demand, which was a nice way of saying people are not buying these Ford Lightnings. And then we have the former CEO of Chrysler coming out a lot harsher to it, saying, I mean, they had over 100 days of inventory, they had all this capital tied up, and then they have dealers that aren't able to sell them. So they were getting upset. So people aren't buying the EVs, which brings us back to, does legislation continue to force EVs, basically whether gas-fired cars can't be sold after a certain date, such as 2035, which is cropping up in a lot of areas. It's tied to California rules, where we've had a lot of these rules roll out from. We talked about a couple weeks ago how Berkeley, the natural gas ban and new construction, that was overturned in the courts. And that's what a lot of the other states have tacked onto, whether it's a state of New York or cities such as Massachusetts or other parts of the country. Will those get overturned? Either way, our real takeaway is a whole bunch of moving parts regarding EVs, but the quicker they get on the road, the quicker demand will rise, putting upward pressure on pricing. So again, this is going to come down to who's in charge, who's making the rules, and will consumer choice prevail, or will it be a force to change technology, which will drive up demand? Because consumer choice will be a much longer adoption until the infrastructure is actually there. Some other flashy headlines this week were, plastic bag ban in New Jersey that is blown up because it's actually way more harmful to the environment. We talked about the straw debacle of not using plastic straws, which some companies like Starbucks made lids that used even more plastic and were worse for the environment. So some of these rules and mandates coming down have been maybe with good intention, or at least to push the agenda for, but not really tested academically or the repercussion of what's going on. Not lining up with reality. Very lofty goals, very ambitious, not to knock any of that, but reality has to be considered at some point if we want resiliency and reliability on the electric grid. So keeping around this story from last week, because this pertains directly to the grid, this is the engineers and the people at the grid saying, if you want reliability and resiliency, we cannot turn off some of these fossil fuel plants. So PJM coming out saying, we need to delay the shutdown of three oil plants and a natural gas plant past 2025 when it was supposed to retire, because we're going to need it for that much long to keep the area with power. So this is a problem. We have the NERC reliability warning for this winter for most of our markets. We've had every single one of our major markets put forth this idea that reliability and resiliency is really at stake if this is not done well, and currently it's on a path to lead us down a very precarious place. If everything's done perfectly, great. We run into any hiccups, we shut down the supply of fossil fuel generation that's dispatchable and try to replace it with intermittent supply that continues to get pushed back and run into troubles. We've talked about offshore wind at length, having trouble getting those built according to forecasts, which currently they are very behind. So our takeaway is simply, do we have that balanced approach, which will keep the outer years in a more stable price environment? Or do we just push ahead with everything and hope for the best, which definitely could add some upside volatility for outside years? And we're taking a look at with clients, explaining, taking a piece of that risk off of those outside years by maybe a hybrid product, taking 25, 50% chunk off of them. Moving over to the Israel situation that's going on, we had Hamas terrorist attack. Israel has been fighting back, and it started to sprawl into more of the Middle East. And that's the problem, is does this stay contained to the region or start affecting a larger area and bring in other countries? Iran has been very against Israel in this, and they've backed up their threats. They've attacked some surrounding countries, which Pakistan attacked them back. But the big question was, does this affect any of our supply, right? Because we're only just looking at this through, how does this affect energy and supply through that very narrow lens? And we were wondering, is the Strait of Hormuz, the Suez Canal, any of the surrounding bodies of water going to have trouble? Well, there's been trouble in the Gulf of Oman, the Red Sea, all the different areas. And now we're seeing that hundreds of large supply vessels are being rerouted around South Africa instead of going through the Suez Canal. So if you can see the graphic in the bottom left, the blue line basically would be the path the ships would sail, and now they're going to have to take that orange path. And some of that's energy and some of that are parts for the clean energy push. And they have to travel that both ways to reload. So this could start becoming more of a world issue with the supply chain issue. Again, hopefully things get better sooner than later, but this could really start causing those supply issues we've been talking about for several months now. And we know that we were told, our national security advisor was told that this is going to take longer than several months. And the latest attempt at a ceasefire, Israel just put forth its most recent proposal for a 2-month ceasefire, which Hamas rejected. I mean, they're both giving each other ceasefire options that neither one that are really anywhere close to agreeing to because of the terms. So just want to make sure clients are aware of all these global energy stories, because we are part of that global energy market because of LNG and our exports. Taking a look at China, again, we are now in 2024. We have the waiver for solar products coming from those 4 Southeast Asian countries that were found guilty of rubber stamping Chinese products and sending them here. And this is solar panels, which it's not a small chunk. It's 85% of our solar panels in 2021 and around 88% of our solar panels in 2022 came from China and these 4 other countries. So this could really upend our entire solar industry come June or even sooner. There's also a lot of worry around how tax credits and things are being handled and whether they can be used on companies that are associated with China or have some type of investment company from there. So that is still being worked out. Left the graphic up from last week for the channel partners on the line. Big news from Taiwan is that the Democratic Progressive Party won. So that's the candidate most aligned with the US for Taiwan's independence, and the most against what China wants. So that's very upset China. China's lashed out at other countries for congratulating the new president. And the US just sailed its first warship through the Taiwan Strait since the Taiwan election, which China's especially upset about because they think it's kind of a victory lap for the US doing that. So the relationship has continued to get rocky. And more importantly is we were asking at the end of last year, well, through the summer and into the last year, what happens if they stop exporting energy related materials? We knew that we'd been in a fight with them about computer chips, which has been talked about a lot in the news. Well, they started cutting off the minerals for computer chips. And they basically went to 0 or negligible levels instead of supplying a good portion to the world, above 50%. And now they cut off some graphite products called graphene that are related to EV batteries, and that started on December 1st. We're waiting for the January or February reports to come out to reflect that. But recently, at the end of December of last year, they just banned the export technology of rare earth magnets, and that's regarding wind turbines. Because if the EV stuff doesn't get here, for just through the price lens, right, less EVs on the road, less demand, less upward pressure on pricing. However, on the other side, if we aren't able to build these wind turbines that we need to build, right, we're not going to hit any of these forecasts that we're already far behind on, and that could really throw a wrench in, whether we need to keep fossil fuels on for some time, some longer time, like the PJM example, or not. And we hope that they don't expand this any further into any other products affecting the energy industry. Taking a look at Russia, Ukraine, NATO big stories this week. So they just started operations Steadfast Defender, 90,000 troops, over 1,000 tanks, a couple hundred jets maybe, and there's also some boats going to be involved as well. So this is the biggest military exercise by NATO since the Cold War, really trying to show that they have their stuff together if Russia really decides to get serious on a lot of the threats they've been putting forth. Other news that could further upset Russia is the Turkish parliament just approved Sweden's membership to NATO. It still needs to be signed by their president, and it still needs to be approved by Hungary, but it looks like it's on its way. This would dramatically change Russia's access in the Baltic Sea of where they feel safe versus where NATO is, because basically all the Baltic Sea would be on the border of NATO for them to pass through, which was part of the reason the Ukraine war started. They don't want a neighbor that touches them, which Finland does, right? And that border is huge now for NATO, versus if Ukraine had joined NATO, right? They didn't want someone next to them being in an opposing group. So this could further upset Russia and really get something going, which might be the reason why, NATO's kicking off such a big military drill to deter that. So we'll keep an eye on that, but Again, things don't seem to be getting any better, and we talked in past weeks about how money's continued to pour in. There is a story about, the Pentagon has drawn down as many supplies, but that doesn't mean that there's not more money sent, because we just have to build more before we could send more over. And here's the NERC reliability assessment I had mentioned, taking a look. All of our major markets at least had elevated risk, and this is from the academics and engineers are saying, like, okay, if a couple of these scenarios happen, we could be in a lot of trouble. And that's now, before a lot of these actual clean push energy forecasts take effect of what needs to be shut down and what needs to be built. And as we look, this is updated, looks very much the same, and just looking at the solar and wind lines of purple and green, we don't really see those shooting up into the future, just kind of traveling up gradually from left to right. So we don't expect those as generation sources to really take over in the short term. And we've seen the back half of 22 and the front half of 23, waiting for the finalized reports really come out for the back half of last year. But we see all of our major markets really up just a small percentage or down a small percentage year over year. So we're not making jumps of 5, 10, 15% of moving renewable, like some stories might have clients believing. Taking a look at the capacity bucket, because capacity pass-through is still a great option for PJM and ICE in New England, especially as you get to the medium to large customers, since they get the most benefit, although it can help everyone. If we look below the yellow line, since the new rules have been implemented to allow subsidized assets, the auction has continued to clear lower. So with the new rules, that lid and more coming in, expecting to keep a lid on those prices so the market side will stay down. So as long as your client's cap tag isn't going to blow through the roof because they can't move anything around, or they're a rock crusher or some type of medical facility, capacity pass-through is a really good option to at least examine, especially since the PJM capacity market has been kicked back again. They are well behind the 3 years forward they're supposed to be for the capacity auction, which is supposed to give the time to build either these assets or get things put in place. We were supposed to run the most recent auction this past June. It's been kicked to at least next June, and that was to try to get them on the path to getting back on schedule. So still waiting to see how that decision comes forward. And we do have the FCA forward capacity auction 18 for capacity year June 2027 through May of 2028, starting next month. So May 5th, that will kick off. We'll run for a while, and then we'll get those results out to you after they are published. But FCA 19 for the following year, for February 2025, was just moved to February 2026 because now ICE New England wants to add some more rules surrounding some of these clean and energy assets being added, or subsidized assets. We also know that we're phasing out CSAPR and MOPR, which are just fancy acronyms for basically allowing for more subsidized renewables and minimum offer price rules to be phased out, allowing for prices to really keep a lid on it or move lower. So it would benefit a client, because if they lock in capacity and it clears lower, supplier keeps the money. I've said, whereas if they had a capacity pass-through, they would get that money back. Taking a look at weather, this is the December forecast for January and March, now that we're almost through January. And we see in the top right for Maine, that's more the likely above average versus just leaning above one way or the other. We talked about some of those forecasts from November and October, where the Great Lakes had a lot darker reds and oranges. So that would kind of be some protection from storms in the area. And the bands have kind of moved up of that orange from the bottom of the mid-Atlantic. So less protection, closer to equal chances. And really it's going to come down to how many more storms do we get before the end of the year to drive up those LMPs. So this is the January forecast looking at February, April. And we see that red at the top of Maine's gone. So that protection from the Great Lakes in Maine for the Northeast NISO area, top of Pennsylvania, that's kind of gone. And you see in Texas, got that in the west, the below average temperatures. So we might see some more cold coming through there. So we know El Nino conditions still do continue, but some other factors have arisen really of how the storm goes. We had the Farmer's Almanac and the Old Farmer's Almanac. Now these are long-term forecasts that came out at the end of the summer, calling for more snow. More importantly, I want to bring attention to the yellow highlighted part here. So we've seen this a couple times, but The window for snow producing nor'easters will open in late January through February. So that's what we're walking into the teeth of. And that's the big question. Does that happen? Or do we skate through the rest of the winter with not too many problems? If we start to have problems, we're going to see prices shoot back up. We've seen the roller coaster ride of prices have earlier on, some of the storms in the past couple of weeks have sent prices right back up. And then when we perform well in a storm, prices come right back down. And that also affects those future months as we, for the coming years, winter 25, 26, 26, 27. The issue is we can't really predict Arctic blocking, which is what sends the cold snaps down through the country, which happens all the time in the north, at least in mid-Atlantic. And sometimes, as we see from the second graphic from the left for Winter Storm Uri, when it comes down the middle of the country. So how many more snowstorms and cold shots are going to be this winter? How many more do we have left? Are we going to run into any more issues? How is that natural gas story that we talked about at the beginning going to drastically change or not? Because if we actually get below that gray line, we could be in a very different spot than we were just a couple of weeks ago. So might be some more snow on this way this weekend. Looks like light snow through most of New England into New York, some of Pennsylvania, where moderate kind of as you get more into the Northeast. Might be the wintry mix, and that's kind of being left up right now. Taking a look at the 7-day forecast, blue arrows indicating the lowest temperatures. We see Monday, Tuesday really being cold and staying cold in New England and PJM starting off next week. So this might be a good reason to wrap prices up. I mean, before the end of this week, before some of that cold and snow comes through, causing prices to move back up. And some of that's coming down the middle of the country, getting blown over from Canada, and some coming over from the middle of the country from Illinois, as we see. I mean, 31 and 32 Sunday to Monday, and then that happens on PJM, ice snowing on Monday to Tuesday. Also, same cold days for ERCOT for Sunday and Monday, and temperatures getting a little warmer by next Thursday for now, but that could drop the cold. Again, that's what we're looking out for. This can change on a dime. It's the polar blocking. 4 days is for good accuracy. They don't forecast it really more than 2 weeks out. Taking a look at market data. All right, so this is the monthly chart. Big changes this week. February 24 dropped like a rock for right now as we're getting close. And that sometimes happens just as you're finishing out a month. So that's important, but take that with a grain of salt as looking at the balance of the year as well, those movements, because if you have a client starting a term, right, they're probably already starting in February and they're probably not taking up the whole month. So they're not going to see that same change in pricing. And if you have a term past there, February was the biggest mover this week for a lot of our markets. So taking a look now, we are looking, since we've started the year 2024, we're looking at the balance of 2024. And for balance, we're using February to December of 2024. And one thing to note is that the old highs are disappearing. So if we look on the long-term graph, these used to be the old highs just recently. And by the week, right, it's dropping down. So when you take a look at the 52-week, a lot of these charts look a lot different. So just take your time to get used to them, and because the stories are changing, although we kind of still have them in a similar place except for ERCOT electricity. So ice in New England, balance of the year was off 5.5 mils week to week, establishing the new 52-week low just yesterday, and that was mostly due to February dropping like a rock for now. And again, we have possible snow coming this weekend. Calendar year 25, for ice in New England was off 2 mils week to week, now back closer to the 52-week low after it had kind of recently made a push back up towards the average. And that's that roller coaster we're going to continue to be on throughout winter. But again, still buying below the 52-week average, great point, because this we could very quickly be in a new price environment. And the 52-week charts are going to look different as the olds roll off. Algonquin was off 4 cents week to week after establishing the new 52-week low on Tuesday. Calendar year 25 for Algonquin for ice and aluminum gas, off 3.5 cents week to week, just establishing the new 52-week low. Similar story for PJM, 2024 dropping off, February come down. We see the 7-1 top line, that's where we had the bars just shortly ago, and now they've come down greatly from that. Again, they could bounce right back up. It comes down to LMPs, which you can monitor by going on the PJM Ice in New England website, show it to a client so they understand that an actual price ticks off on the screen every few minutes so that they can understand what a real-time or index price is when talking about the hybrid product. Taking a look at PJM Western Hub balance of the year, February, December, was off 5.5 mils week to week, now closer to the 52-week low after just being above and getting close to that 52-week high. Now, one thing to also notice on these charts is the y-axis hasn't changed. So the numbers in this case, right, they're only going moving by a mil on each of them, where beforehand with the old highs, these movements didn't look as drastic. So the actual range, right, 4.9 to 3.9, if it used to go up to 7 or 8, all these changes look smaller. So they are kind of more zoomed in. So getting used to that as well as you're talking about these graphs. Take a look at PJM calendar year 25, off 2 mils week to week, now closer to the midpoint between the 52-week average and low after recently being above the 52-week average. So again, being able to pick up below 52-week average, pretty good spot to, compelling enough for clients. TETCO for PJM gas off 2.5 cents week to week for balance of the year, still close to the 52-week low. And TETCO calendar year 25 off a penny and a half week to week, still close to the 52-week low. Taking a look at ERCOT going out in the future, looking August 2024 was recently at 11.7 a kilowatt hour or $117 a megawatt hour. It's back to about 10.5 or 105. We've seen the roller coaster of this being well above, but it has been climbing recently from around 7.5 up until about 11.7. It had a little bit of a drop this week. The summer is still a great concern after what happened this past summer for ERCOT. And that's really the story that we're worried about for ISO New England PJM. Prices are low right now. The late January to February was supposed to be the problem to begin with. We're starting to get some of those storms. If they continue to materialize, really could drive prices a lot higher. And clients are going to be wishing they had done at least taken a piece of that risk off the table. Taking a look at ERCOT Houston balance of the year, looking at February to December, off 9 mils week to week. So February crashed as well for Houston. They think they're going to get through winter fine after faring all right through the past cold spell that they had, but still above the 52-week average, but closer. Take a look at calendar year 25 for ERCOT Houston, off 3 mils week to week. So again, taking a look at the numbers on the y-axis is important. On some graphs, they jump by 5 or 10. On some graphs, they only go up by 1. So very important when looking at whether, is this a drastic move or is it that, the numbers aren't really that far apart. Taking a look at Houston Ship Channel, off 1 cent week to week, still close to that 52-week low. And Houston Ship Channel calendar year 25, still closer to the 52-week low after recently having that upward push with a lot of other markets as the cold was starting to show up. And again, Henry Hub, Houston Ship Channel neighbors, pretty similar shape and chart. But as we go around the country, ISO New England, the most expensive with basis. That's the difference between the blue and the gray line. It is closer now than it was in those old bases rolling off on the 52-week chart from when prices were a lot higher. And that's what we're worried about, is the space between the blue and the gray getting bigger or the red coming back above the gray. So right now, PJM gas is actually a negative basis if you use the same 1 unit every hour of the year, but we know our clients use more during the winter and then the summer for this. So when they weighted average, you're not going to get a negative basis most likely for your client, but it's going to be very close. Great time to lock in basis on PJM. And just taking a look at that more under a magnifying glass with Houston Ship Channel, Henry Hub in gray, and PJM in red. Taking a look at the outside years, kind of seeing the years bounce around for ISO New England. Again, the roller coaster ride is going to continue probably until at least mid-March, depending on how long winter stretches. So ISO New England, 25 was off 2 mils, 26 and 27 were off 1.5 mils, and the outer years were off a little bit less than that. And then we take a look at the multi-year line graph. So 2023 is off, and now we go out to 2027. Also noticing that for the electric, because data only goes back so far, year 2027 doesn't go all the way to the left. So if a client asks this, just say, well, that's, we only had good data going back that far, because these things only trade, 10 years or so ahead of time as they move forward, maybe 8 years. And then the other thing to point out is that the navy blue line for calendar year 2024, notice it doesn't go to the edge because that's the last price before this year started. So now we're looking at the balance of the year. But in context, we want to take a look at how high did these years trade, right? We have President Biden taking office, rules changing towards clean, shutting down dispatchable, reliable things we've had. This is not saying whether that's a good or bad thing, just simply what it does to supply and demand, and then everything getting exacerbated by all the world conflicts going on that are disrupting supply chain issues, and then the economic issues at home of high interest rates and inflation making things more expensive, right? So kind of in this new land here with prices here, you could say either, 25's already traveled here, 24 got up to here. So those arrows we talked about on that early slide versus how low it can go from here is there's a bigger upside risk, and we want to make sure clients are at least aware of that. Taking a look at PJM wholesale going out in the future, 25 was off 2 mils, 26 and 27 off 1.5 mils as well, and outer years off a little less. And one thing to point out, this gray bar here is the average price that 2024, so January 1st through December 31st during that year of 2023, that the year 2024 traded. This is the average price that 2024 traded during the year of 2023. So we can see, 25 is about there. Some of those outside years higher for PJM. And again, the stories are changing. The highs aren't as high as they were before because now calendar year 24 is the year that's rolled off where 2023 disappeared, and that one shot a lot higher than everything else. But again, walking through the scenarios of where prices can go from here. And taking a look at ERCOT Houston, very flat, and this is just by chance on the day that the average price that 24 traded during the year of 23 pretty much lines up with all the outside years. Just recently, they were higher up there. So 25 was off 3 mils, 26 and 27 were off 3.5 mils, and the outer years were off a little bit less. But we know ERCOT trades a lot tighter, which is why when we take a look at the line graph, all the way to the right, the 4 on the left, you can kind of see the 4 different lines. And then you see just 2024 kind of trade up on that idea that winter might be bad, and then really the summer pricing that came through versus all the other years, 25, 26, 27 are pretty much all overlapping each other. And just finally, some points to consider. Again, still kind of in the same situation, but the stories are very much changing rapidly as those old weeks disappear, and some of the stories we've been talking about are materializing. We want to manage risk by evaluating how high or low the market can go from here and explaining to clients whether it's a reasonable time to lock in, or maybe you look at a hybrid product so they're not picking one or the other. Evaluating those longer terms now, because a lot of these stories out there, if they get moved forward, which really probably be very closely tied to the elections, if they go forward, really bullish for prices, which is bad for rates for our clients. Most expensive months, very important to look at, and when comparing of utility rates versus us, because the winter rates for ISO New England and PJM are a lot higher during the winter, so utility rates look higher. They start trying to sell the spring rates sooner than later so they can say, oh, our prices look real lower, but that doesn't include all 12 months of the year. So being able to talk to a client about that and explain that, and the opposite for ERCOT, where those are the most expensive months, especially July and August. The green point, really all of our market data is drastically changed. We're looking at balance of 2024, the full year calendar year 25. We're looking further out on the future on the bar charts. So getting acclimated and kind of adjusting your story to kind of fit where we are now. We are in a different spot from, even over the past year and a half, it's been evolving where we shot straight up. We had nothing of a winter last year, but prices really kind of traveling along the bottom and then falling off a little further. We have a lot of reasons. Things just got moving back up. So at least clients are aware, and you're reaching out to them so that if you need to call them and say, this is happening, let's take a look at and review pricing, they can do that. Whole government push to go in clean and green is continuing. Elections would probably be the only thing that would stop that. Big question is, do we do it well? If we shut down the fossil fuel supply and not be able to bring on renewable supply, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. And that PJM story really speaks to the grids are speaking up, NERC's giving the warning, plants are being extended from retirement. Even California's extended its nuclear plant that it was supposed to shut down years ago. they call it a backup, but still being used very much to supply a majority of the power. So making this transition is a very difficult thing. It's not very easy, and we just want to make sure clients are prepared for it. And other than that, talking about capacity and renewables help differentiate, showing extra value to a client besides other products that we offer here at Mantis that can further help their capacity tag out. So thank you everyone for attending. For our partners, please reach out to your account manager if you want to discuss any of these topics more, or if you need anything customized.